Welcome to Seeking Alpha's CEO Interviews. Quality of leadership is a decisive factor in stock performance, so we provide in-depth interviews with the best and brightest CEOs in the public markets. We publish limited excerpts from our interviews on social media platforms and the full interviews at seekingalpha.com and in the highly rated Seeking Alpha mobile app. To find the full interviews, open seekingalpha.com or the Seeking Alpha mobile app and search for the phrase CEO Interviews, or simply type a stock ticker into the search box.
Welcome to CEO Interviews. I'm your host, Jesse Redmond, and today we're joined by Justin Kenna, CEO of GameSquare. Justin, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's start big picture talking about yourself. Let's talk about your background.
So I've been in LA now for 7 years. I was actually running strategy and finance for a production company here in LA, doing a lot of like snackable online digital content, music videos, TV ads. Really great company. We were getting ready to go out and raise some money when I got an interesting phone call from a friend who was asking me about my knowledge of the gaming industry, being esports and gaming. And, at that time, to be quite frank with you, was pretty limited. I understood that this was a really fast growing industry. And this is roughly sort of 4.5, 5 years ago. But I personally, I'd played video games growing up, but I certainly wouldn't have classed myself as a gamer. And he actually introduced me to the guys at FaZe Clan and said, you've got to go meet these guys. Really, really interesting brand. So at that time, and for those listening who don't know who FaZe Clan are, maybe jump online and have a look. I mean, they're the biggest lifestyle brand in gaming and esports by a long way. So they had this huge audience and huge following, but they weren't really a business yet. And it was funny because I wasn't looking to leave my role, and it actually took sort of 6 months of going back and forth to the house. There was 8 guys working out of the house at the time, as any good businesses start, and took the leap of faith and joined FaZe Clan, and that really set me on my path in terms of the gaming and esports industry.
Can you just briefly describe FaZe Clan for folks not familiar?
Sure. So FaZe Clan's the biggest lifestyle gaming brand in the space. They have an esports component, which is the professional part of gaming, the pro teams. I think they roughly have 9 teams now that travel the world and play in tournaments. And that part of your model is sort of more akin to your traditional sports models. They derive prize money and sponsorships, and they have fixed player salaries, etc. What really differentiated FaZe Clan is they had a content creation business with talent that were gamers, but really became lifestyle celebrities. And some of the biggest, YouTubers in the world, guys who are some of the biggest streamers on Twitch. A lot of these guys are born out of gaming, but there was a real crossover into traditional sport and entertainment. So they actually integrated guys like Nigel Houston, who's the best skateboarder in the world, Juju Schuster, the NFL player, Ben Simmons, NBA player, Offset and Lil Yachty, who are rappers. And really, FaZe Clan, I think, was the first brand they really sat at this intersection of pop culture and integrated traditional sport and entertainment into gaming and esports, and really built out a huge content and merch business off the back of that. So really interesting business. And I think within this space was the first business to really pave the way in terms of really large scale commercial deals with brands. So yeah, I mean, my time at FaZe Clan, I was the CFO of FaZe for a touch over 3 years. I raised close to 60 million in debt and equity over that time. Grew FaZe from nearly roughly 1 to 2 million revenue to, I think they're forecasted to do over 60 million revenue this year. So really exponential growth. And I think, kind of touching back on what I was just saying, I think the most important part of that growth was, really being a pioneer in the space, because, I still remember a roadshow, roughly 3 years ago, doing our first raise, meetings on Wall Street, meetings on Bay Street, Toronto, New York, Montreal, and going to these meetings. And this wasn't what gaming and esports is today, where we're seeing huge dollars being invested in the space. There's a lot of question marks and a lot of gray hair in these meetings, thinking that the story is interesting and understanding that the kids play video games, but some huge question marks around monetization.
Yeah.
and how you actually monetize this and make this a real business. And I found that really, really interesting. So, while I was the CFO, I was really heavily involved in the growth and strategy and large scale corporate deals and structuring those and bringing in a number of those. So that was really interesting, building out a business and really building out sort of new revenue streams in a way within a new industry. And so I actually, I left FaZe Clan at the end of last year. I was introduced to the guys at GameSquare and, left on really great terms. I mean, I had dinner with Lee Trink, the CEO of FaZe, a couple of weeks ago. I'm talking with the guys there constantly, and there's a few different opportunities for us to partner with them, which is really interesting. What GameSquare is and why we're sort of different in the space is we're building a business that really focuses on the monetization of this space. So when I talked about GameSquare and the sort of different parts, so when I spoke about FaZe Clan, the different sort of buckets that exist, the esports team-based bucket and one we have two teams. One is break even and the other is profitable. The actual esports teams, a lot of them are still burning a lot of cash. So what we've done is we've taken a real focus on the media agency vertical within gaming and esports. And our whole ethos is around connecting global brands to this huge end consumer. So this huge audience that is gaming and esports communities. And our ethos there in relation to connecting brands to end consumer is sitting in between the two, right? And building out agency digital marketing verticals. So we have an influencer agency in the UK where we connect influencers, broadcast talent to brands and to events and to activations. And we have a media and marketing agency here in LA called GCN, who are really a more akin to a traditional agency, but quite unique in the space given their experience. They understand the audience. They understand endemic and non-endemic. They have backgrounds. Keogh Wimmer and Jeff Griffith, the two founders of this business. Keogh's ex-UFC and Fox Sports. Jeff Griffith is ex-Curse Media, which was bought out by Twitch. So he was running the media business for Twitch. So real experience there in this space. And their CMO that just hired, Chris Kint, was running Red Bull Media House. So, I mean, amazing backgrounds, amazing experience. And they create bespoke campaigns, soup to nuts for brands to reach this audience, but also their sort of secret sauce. They partner with 75 web properties that actually reach 160 million eyeballs a month. And that is through overlay of media. And that's really reaching these hardcore gaming communities, which traditional agencies and a lot of brands really struggle in doing so.
I'm not a gamer myself. I'm a father of an 11 and a 13-year-old, and my son especially is into gaming. And so I've learned from him, and I've played Mario Kart and Fortnite are the only two games I've played so far. Mario Kart probably doesn't apply to this conversation. But for the audience that might be like myself and maybe a little bit older, not necessarily gamers, can you just talk about what are esports, who plays them, what games they're playing, just kind of frame the space a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting, right? Our agency business, GCN, talk about audience a lot. And I think it's really interesting. And they talk about the core, the crew, and the crowd. So the crowd is you, right? The crowd is somebody who, might pick up a controller to play a game with their son. It might be a middle-aged mum who plays at half an hour of Candy Crush a day. They don't sort of align with being a gamer, but they are actually still gaming. Then we have the core, the crew, and the crowd. We have the crew. The crew are your gamers. They're your casual gamers. They're playing. They might be consuming a little bit of content through Twitch. They would be they're probably playing Call of Duty. They know what Fortnite is, but they're not playing all the time. And then you have the core, and the core are your gamers. And this is a really big audience, and they're consuming so much gaming content through Twitch. They're playing, they're engaging, and they're a part of this community. So where our agency business really focuses on is the core and the crew. And so what we talk about in relation to, what is esports, what's gaming, what constitutes an esport. So I think the easiest way to think about it is esports is the professional part of gaming. And if you think about it, I guess, in a traditional sports sense, it's something like, if you think about basketball, right? You might play in a rec league, or you go play pickup down on, the courts, your local courts, and you play with your buddies. You're playing basketball, but so you're a gamer, but you're not playing esports. Esports is when you're playing in the pro leagues, right? You might be playing in the NBA or in the Europe-based league. Esports is for pro gamers. And these guys, I think this is the hardest part for people to get their head around. These guys get paid fixed salaries. They get percentages of prize money. They're traveling the world, and they're playing in front of big crowds. Now, what those games generally consist of, the bigger esports are generally first-person shooter games, like your Counter-Strike, your Call of Duty, Fortnite. You're seeing the emergence of Valorant and other games like that. You guys have probably heard of, World of Warcraft, Dota, Overwatch, etc. They're more of your sort of hardcore esports. Now, there is a crossover with games into traditional sports, and FIFA is probably the biggest esport. But I think where it becomes confusing is a lot of people that don't truly understand this industry. They think that esports is, guys playing Madden, right, which is the NFL game within esports, and or NBA 2K and or FIFA. Those games, FIFA again constitutes more as an esport. Madden and NBA 2K less so, and you'll really see what resonates with this crowd in terms of esports that have franchise leagues or big audience or are selling out big stadiums. They're your first person shooter games and not so much your traditional sport games. And so what has happened is, with the emergence of Fortnite was really the game that kind of changed the model of what this all looks like, right? So you had your esports over here, and then you had your sort of gamers over here. And I'll explain what that means, because now there's this crossover. Esports was really, you could only really monetize this industry traditionally if you're a pro gamer. That's now not the case. There's a lot of streamers. So the emergence of Fortnite and the emergence of Twitch, you see a lot of these gamers streaming online from their bedroom, and they're monetizing. So how that works is through Fortnite and through Twitch, you have this huge audience that's online. So Twitch monetizes in three ways. You have subscription revenue, so you build a big subscriber base and you'll get paid. You have AdSense revenue, which is your more traditional sort of revenue stream, akin to AdSense revenue through YouTube and how your YouTubers traditionally get paid. Then the third one, which is quite unique, is donation revenue, and this can be really substantial. So what happens is, if I'm online and I'm playing Fortnite, I'm pretty good, but also I'm a personality, so I'm engaging and I'm talking and I'm funny and I'm giving shout outs to my fans, and what they're doing to keep you on and to get shout outs and to have you stream longer is they're donating money. And so it's really interesting at FaZe Clan, the guys that were really the big revenue earners they were making more money on a Tuesday night from their bedroom than guys that are actually on planes traveling the world. So super interesting, but there's now much more crossover in the esports and gaming world because of games like Fortnite, where you've seen the big emergence of streamers. And what that actually does is, for guys that are streaming online, they build an audience, right? So a lot of these guys become kind of lifestyle content celebrities because they can then create content on different platforms that they can monetize. So it's really interesting.
And so are there people that are into the esports but aren't into the Twitch streaming revenue, or is there pretty good overlap between those two pieces?
Yeah, there's overlap for sure. I mean, a lot of the major tournaments now within esports are broadcast live through Twitch. But yeah, there's definite overlap. What I'd say is the difference probably is, somebody who is on a pro Counter-Strike or Call of Duty team, they're not so much, creating kind of lifestyle content or becoming like, a huge celebrity on Instagram and YouTube and these other platforms, whereas the guys on Fortnite they monetize content. The guys that are playing your hardcore esports, they really don't have time. These guys are training every day. They have strict training regimes. They have diets. They have fitness trainers. They are traveling the world playing in tournaments. They don't have time to be, creating content outside of their pure training. And that's kind of one of the main differences.
Is there one that's more profitable than the others? Is it possible somebody could be on Twitch and doing super well there and actually making more than the pro esports guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, your big Fortnite guys are really, your big streamers are really the guys that are, making the most money in this space. But there are games where if you're a pro player and you're, at the top of your game, that, you're doing very well. It's interesting though. It's still a bit of a wild west in terms of that world, especially in the unfranchised model. So, and what I mean by that is, there are franchise leagues that have been popping up that are run by the publisher. So, for example, you'll have a Call of Duty league, which there's only a certain amount of franchise spots, and it's quite a large amount of capital to actually buy one of those slots. But with that, there's an amount of sales and marketing that the league will commit to. They'll be running the tournament. You have this implied sort of valuation because you own a slot in that league, i.e., you are the LA Lakers of the NBA. There's only a certain amount of teams that are in that league, and the prize pools are divvied up, and there's media spend and rev share, etc. Then there's open league play, and what open leagues are, quite often, unless you're one of the bigger teams that's really established and has a big audience and has a track record, you're generally either paying to participate in tournaments or you're qualifying for tournaments. And Counter-Strike's probably a good one to use as an example because it's not a closed league play, but it's quite hard to get a slot in the open league tournaments. Now, it's been interesting because FaZe Clan has traditionally been an open league team, and the teams that we have are in open leagues. And I'm more of an open league believer because, I'm not a huge believer in deploying $20, $30 million of capital to buy a spot in a franchise league in a game that who knows if it's actually going to be relevant in 10 years' time when you're actually getting a return. So it's really interesting from that respect in terms of when you look at the differences between open and closed league play. But, what I would say is closed league play is actually starting to regulate salaries of players. So you have salary caps and normalize, in a more traditional sport type sense. What they call the Wild West is really open league esports teams, right? So, basically, if you've got a really big checkbook, you're probably going to win, right? You're going to put the best team on the park. But that's why you'll see a lot of these esports orgs actually burning a lot of cash because the attitude is prize monies will get bigger, audience is getting bigger, brand dollars coming in is getting bigger. There's other ways you can monetize in your actual into the future in your actual pure esports orgs. You need to pay to be relevant, and you don't need to worry about making any profit, right? That's sort of looked at as a marketing expense. So it's interesting because for us, what we're trying to do is really focus on the monetizable areas of this industry, because I'm a really big believer that in the next 24, 36 months, as this market matures, that profitability point and that trajectory to profitability will start to become super important. It hasn't been important to date, because it's really been about growth of the industry, the story of the industry, investors, brands thinking that they need to be in this space, whether they have real knowledge of the space or not. It's this sort of understanding that, okay, this is big, we need to be involved. But the maturation of this industry is going to start to point to, okay, this is great. There's a lot of dollars in the space, there's revenue, but where's the profitability? How do you make this a real business? And that's really our focus at GameSquare.
And you talked earlier about working during the financial crisis, probably 2008 to 2010 sort of period, and you learned that you can be great at business, but if the wind is in your face, so to speak, sometimes it's hard to overcome those challenges despite how hard you're working or how well you might individually be doing. I see the gaming industry as being currently a bit of the opposite of that, and it has a lot of momentum. It's something that's growing, it's expanding, it's appealing to that younger generation. Can you talk a little bit about some of the metrics behind the growth of the space, how big it is and how much it is growing and where you see it going over the next, let's call it 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, totally. So it's interesting. I mean, I think this sort of blows people away a little bit. But the revenue within the gaming and esports industry is actually larger than the movie and music industries combined. Like this is an enormous industry, and the dollars that are being invested in the space are in the billions. So it's been interesting, sort of, I think, the evolution of what that's looked like. Again, going out to market to raise money for FaZe Clan roughly 4 years ago was really a very difficult task at that point in time. That's absolutely changed now, right? Like investors are actually starting to understand this industry and space much more. I think that one of the key metrics, is really eyeballs, and I think that the attitude really has been build the audience, capture the audience, and the monetization will come. And it's interesting that you brought up, the 2008 financial crisis and that example, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to look into the future and mitigate the future risk. So as I was talking to before, I think in 2 to 3 years' time, the story changes a little bit. I think there are some orgs out there that are burning a lot of cash, and they have some really large multiples on valuation that are going to have a hard time justifying those valuations into the future if they can't prove out a profitable model, or at least a trajectory to doing so. So what we're trying to do is get ahead of that game and make sure that, not only do we, receive the upside, as you were talking to, you're seeing this huge momentum in the space, right? So not only do we get the upside of that, but we're mitigated to that risk, because we want to build the first publicly traded company of real revenue scale. And that's what we're in the process of building, is that real revenue scale that's actually profitable. And that's actually a real focus for us. And it doesn't mean that every acquisition we make is of a profitable entity, but we have to be able to see a path and a trajectory to profitability, or else we won't look at it. We're just not in the business of buying revenue to add in right now to get a short-term gain into stock price, get a short-term gain into market cap and rev profile. We're not into that. We are building what we think is a really fundamentally sound business that will hold the test of time, no matter what the external forces do. If you're cash flow positive in an industry like this one, I think you're going to be really well positioned no matter what the market does.
And so we talked about your background, we talked about the space a bit. Let's circle back to, where does GameSquare fit into all of this? You have the leagues being played, you have the sponsorship opportunities. Talk a little bit about the different revenue lines for GameSquare and how you're making money in the space.
Totally. So, GameSquare, we are building, what we consider and hope to be the biggest media business within gaming and esports. So as I was talking to before, our focus is really around the agency digital marketing verticals. We are still open to looking at team-based assets, because they do still help connect brands and end audience. That's our whole ethos as a company, is connecting global brands to this huge audience. And we're doing so through gaming and esports. So currently we have 2 teams. One is a League of Legends team in Mexico City. The other is a Crossfire franchise in China. Both have a huge amount of eyeballs. What they give us is nice end optionality, good cross-selling opportunities, and a huge audience, right? That we can leverage off when we plug in our agency business and our media solutions. And I'll talk to what that actually means in a minute. We have, the 2 assets that make up the bulk of our revenue currently is we have an influencer agency in the UK, which I spoke to before, called Code Red. And we have our marketing and media engine in LA called GCN, Gaming Community Network. So what they're doing is, how they monetize is really, the creation of soup to nuts bespoke campaigns for large brands, i.e., we're in the process of closing out a deal with US Polo. We're working through, we have a consultancy agreement with Bud Light. There are a number of large, traditional sporting leagues and orgs that have this inability to reach this end audience, and that's really where we come in and play. So not only do we build out a strategy as to how they reach that audience, and doing so through content creation and connecting brands to the end audience, but also, as we said, we can overlay and amplify productions, events, tournaments for orgs and for leagues because of our partnership with Web. We have 75 web properties that we partner with that reach eyeballs of hardcore gaming communities that other traditional agencies just purely cannot reach. And one good example of a major project we're working on currently is we're actually running, which is super interesting, the biggest NCAA esports collegiate tournament ever done over the next 2 years, partnering with Van Wagner, which includes 2 national championships. So that's super exciting. But really, our major revenue streams at the moment are very, very similar to your traditional talent and media agencies in terms of influencer revenue, campaign revenue, consultancy revenue, and production revenue.
And the people that you're, I don't know if sponsoring the correct term, or the people you're helping align with these deals, how old are these people that are playing the games? Can the kids be under 16 and be in these leagues, or what's the profile of the person that's actually doing the gaming?
And you're referring to like your pro gamers?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of gamers, content creators, streamers, yes, they're definitely the ages range. I'd say within the pro gaming world, it's sort of roughly 15 to 30. And it's actually interesting, right? It skews a little older than people think. And that's also true to audience, right? I think, traditionally people have viewed gaming as being for kids, and it's, this 8 to 15-year-old audience. The audience from 15 to 30 is actually really large. That, it skews male. We are seeing a lot more females in the space, which is awesome. It does skew male. 15 to 30, high disposable income. It's really that age bracket that brands have been trying to reach forever.
Yeah, I think I remember it was an 18 to 35-year-old male is kind of the sweet spot for advertising because they tend to have a little more discretionary income.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'll give an example is the Fortnite World Cup, which was 2 years ago now. Last year was called off due to COVID. Was a bit of an eye-opening sort of moment to me, for sure, in terms of this space. The Fortnite World Cup was $30 million in total prize money, which was a bigger prize pool than any golf or tennis tournament in the world ever.
Wow.
Which is crazy. It was held at in Queens at Flushing Meadows, where they hold the US Open. Center court, full packed house crowd, and just incredibly entertaining. Right? You have commentators commentating the guys, and there were singles and doubles. So in the singles, the best 100 kids in the world qualified to play in the Fortnite World Cup. So 100 kids, they get dropped into this map and they're playing. And I think the kid who finished 100th got paid $50,000, right? And it works all the way up. And the guy that won $3 million.
Wow.
The average age that qualified out of the 100 kids was 16.7 years old. And you had, I think, Booger from the UK won. He bought his mum a house. He won, $3 million at 16 years of age, which is just crazy. But that gives you a bit of an example of sort of, the age range of these kids that are playing at that really elite level.
And you touched earlier on some of your competitors or others in the space having challenges finding profitability. And we find early on in industry's life cycle that people are, if you look back to technology, people are real forgiving for the first few years, just grow revenue. And they're not that focused on margins or profitability. But as things evolve, that definitely becomes more important to the investors. Can you talk a little bit about where you are on that journey to profitability?
Yeah, totally. So it's interesting, and your point is spot on. I think the key here within this space is really about audience, right? It's about growing audience and capturing audience, and then the monetization will come. So I'm definitely not saying that entities need to be profitable today, but for us into the future, we find that being able to show the trajectory to that is important. And I think you do that through capturing audience. And what I actually mean by that is the companies that are actually sort of burning money in this space are really your traditional esports orgs that aren't monetizing these other vertical revenue streams. So when you build audience, you have the ability to connect brands, to create content, to sell merchandise, to look at these other vertical revenue streams. When you don't have a large audience and you're purely an esports org that's playing in tournaments and deriving prize money and paying salaries, it's a much harder model to justify, because that marketing spend, as I was talking to, if you can fund that marketing spend in your business that goes audience by building out other vertical revenue streams. And again, I'll use FaZe Clan as a really good example of this. FaZe Clan built the biggest audience in the space, bar none. And so while the esports part of their business is burning a little bit of cash, they're able to fund that through really large scale merchandise jobs, through branded content opportunities with global top tier brands. I think that's the key here. If you're a pure esports org, you need to, in the near term, it's not to say in the long term that this won't pay off as these things increase, but to mitigate risk, in my opinion, what's really important is the content creation, right? Part of your business. And it's about capturing and building audience.
Yeah, it seems like you've done a good job building in some additional revenue streams that provide some diversification that perhaps other folks don't have in the space.
Totally.
And when looking at a stock or a company, investors often want to look and say, okay, what's the bullish scenario? How do we see things playing out if all goes well? But also let's talk about that left tail of the distribution curve. What do things look like if they might not go as well? So can you frame those two scenarios, like what might be a real bullish environment for GameSquare, but also be candid on the flip side and say, what are the things that could go wrong from a company perspective or even from an industry perspective that might make it a more challenging period for your company?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think with any nascent new industry, there's always going to be external risks. And as I was talking about before, we are very cognizant and making sure that we're positioning ourselves that mitigates from any external factors. I don't want to sound sort of too one-sided or too bullish, but I mean, if you look at this industry, I think the interesting part comes into where and how you monetize it. I don't think that there's any question around the growth of the industry and it going anywhere, right? Gaming and esports, in my opinion, and if you look at all the numbers, they would agree, it's only going north, right? Our kids and our kids' kids are going to grow up as this being, a much more normal part of life than we did. ESPN, for example, is something that these days kids only consume through a link on YouTube that they somehow stumble over, right? The way that people consume content is very different. So I think the risks are really about, and maybe not even risk being the right word, but I think what needs to evolve is really the monetization of this industry. Because if you look at it, again, not that profitability is the be all and end all, but the only companies to date that have made any real money, and I'm not talking about what they're valued at or their market cap, I'm talking about as a business that have made any real substantial money, are really the publishers, right? They're the guys that are making the games and running the tournaments. Now, a lot of these orgs around, and when I talk about orgs, I'm talking about team-based orgs, and then you have your agency, media sort of businesses, which is more akin to GameSquare, although we play a little bit in between the two. I think you'll see a lot of those, really start to change their monetization models. And again, I think FaZe Clan was a pioneer for that. You're seeing, the evolution of orgs like 100 Thieves, which people may know because Drake was the big investor into 100 Thieves. And you're seeing that they've followed the FaZe Clan model to great success. And that is through building out content, sitting at this intersection of pop culture, bringing in some large scale celebrities, doing some really interesting, collaborations with world-class brands, doing really like cutting edge merchandise drops, etc. So I think you're starting to see that kind of copycat model, and it makes a lot of sense. So from a GameSquare perspective, I think we're incredibly well positioned, as I said, to get the multiples on the upside of where this industry is headed. But I do think that we're mitigated to a bit of risk because we are sitting in the high margin area within this world. We have captured audience and we're going to continue to do so. We're really bullish about our organic growth, but we are looking at complementary M&A. This isn't an M&A vehicle as such, but we do feel that there are going to be a number of really interesting private company assets that we can make multiples on in the public markets. They just don't have access to capital. They don't understand how to get to a liquidity event. We can provide both of those. And really bring in really interesting businesses, great people that fit into our model. So I feel like we're mitigating ourselves to the risk. We're really bullish on the upside, and we feel like we're very cognizant of that tail as you talk to. I think again, not so much a risk, but I think the unknown here is really the future monetization of this space. But to us, we feel that if we position ourselves between brands and audience, we position ourselves as a real content business, as a real media player, that will be extremely well positioned.
And my last question is, how has the pandemic, COVID-19, played into this over the past couple of years? I'd imagine it's presented some challenges, maybe some opportunities as well. And can you talk about if we are fortunate to have COVID continue to diminish globally, is that something that might present some more bullish opportunities for you?
Yeah, totally. It's really interesting. I think there's this misconception around that the gaming industry just absolutely boomed through COVID, and all these entities made so much money, and it's a little bit of a misconception. So in the way that there are opportunities, in the way that it did boom, there were a lot of people at home and a lot of traditional sport wasn't on. So people were gaming. But unless you're, the publisher of a game or you're selling the controllers, like how are you actually monetizing that as an industry, as an org in this industry? And that's sort of the interesting part. So some of the positives there were, more traditional platforms like an ESPN were actually headlining gaming tournaments because there was no traditional sport on. So there were parts of the industry that got a lot more eyeballs, and it highlighted gaming and esports, maybe to a crowd that didn't understand how big this industry was. So that's a definite tick. But on the cross side and on the challenge side, which so many industries went through far greater challenges than the gaming industry. So definitely not crying poor, but some of the challenges obviously were the real momentum of live tournaments, events, and activations, right? So I talked about the Fortnite World Cup, which was, the biggest and best esports tournament I've ever seen globally, and it got a lot of news globally. That was called off. Our esports teams, while playing in some tournaments virtually, were unable to travel. Most tournaments were cancelled. Prize money was, when it was starting to get real momentum, was missing and gone. So that's really what will change, I think, is you'll start to see as hopefully borders open and travel resumes and we get to some level of normalcy, you'll start to see these really large scale events. And I think, tournaments will continue to get bigger and bigger. I think the industry pivoted quite well, and was positioned to do so, right? From being able to communicate online, it's virtual. We're living in a digital world, so I think you will see a lot more of those events. So I do think coming out the other side of it, this industry is in a really strong position. To continue to be able to monetize the virtual content and have online tournaments, as well as start to benefit from, fan engagement and fan experiences. Because I don't think that while you can come up with interesting ways to engage and bring people together online, I do still feel that, being able to engage, in person with your favorite gamers, with other fans, with other experiences is still super important. I think we'll see a lot of that.
Great. Well, this has been fantastic. I've learned a tremendous amount, and it sounds like you certainly have an interesting story here. For investors that are interested in looking to learn more, where would you point them?
Yeah, so GameSquare is listed on the CSE currently. GSQ is the ticker. We're working through a process at the moment to get OTC listed in the US. It's on Pink Sheets currently. GMSQF is the code, but will be OTC listed shortly. So yeah, please check out GameSquare. And I mean, there are genuinely a lot of really interesting companies in this space. So do your research, and I think that's the main thing, right? Do your research, understand what sits behind these assets, and don't just get sucked into the hype of certain stories.